everyone. Welcome to a special episode of At the Boundary, the podcast from the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. I'm Jim Cardoso, Senior Director for GNSI and your host for At the Boundary. Today on the podcast, our special guest will be Nadwa Al-Dawsari, an Associate Fellow from the Middle East Institute. She's a leading expert on Yemen, emerging as one of the most volatile countries in that region. She's also a veteran researcher, conflict analyst, and policy advisor who spent over 12 years in the field working on Yemeni tribes. Today, she'll be talking with GNSI Research Fellow Dr. Armand Mahmoudian, GNSI's resident fellow focusing on the Middle East. As you are no doubt aware, Yemen has been front and center on the world stage the past 3 weeks, following the successful conduct of military strikes by U.S. forces against Houthi targets. While these strikes were somewhat overshadowed by the news of signal chat being used to pass sensitive information, the long-term strategic significance is huge. The Houthis have been wreaking havoc on global shipping in and around the Bab al-Mandeb and the Red Sea, and this was the strongest response yet by the United States. Let's turn it over now to Armand and his conversation with Nadwa Al-Dawsari.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for your kind introduction. And once again, thank you, Nadwa. I want to thank you on behalf of our team at the Global National Security Institute for accepting our invitation. It's a great opportunity and I sincerely appreciate it. But before going forward and talking in depth about the Houthis' recent interaction with the United States, their communication and connection with the Iranian, I want to kind of start the conversation with a historical background. You're a Yemen expert. You have dedicated most of your professional life to study Yemen. And I want to ask your take or insight that where did it all begin? What are Houthis? What's the historical background behind them? What constitutes their social base? What is their ideological manifesto? Basically, who are these people?
Thank you so much for having me, Armand. It's good to be here. That's a big question, but it's also, the answer is simple. Where it all began in terms of the Houthis' rise and now how they've evolved into a regional actor that attacks ship in the Red Sea. Well, the Houthis are Zaydis, in particular Jarudi Zaydis. Zaydis are known to be relatively moderate, but Jarudi Zaydis are not moderate. Jarudi Zaydis believe that the nation should be ruled by an imam who is a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. Yemen was ruled by the imamate theocracy until they were overthrown in 1962. So part of what the Houthis want to do is to reinstate the imamate. But that's domestically. The Houthis are also inspired by the Iranian Revolution. And over the past 30 years, they've established strong relationship with Iran, and they've imported much of the Iranian ideology and sort of mechanisms into the country. And that's where they became a transnational movement with aspirations that are beyond Yemen borders. So what is the Houthis' ideology? So short term, what the Houthis want to do, they want to control Yemen. They want to expand into the region. Medium term, they want to take the holy sites in Mecca and Medina. And then long term, they want to destroy Israel. They want to capture Jerusalem, where they want to establish an Islamic governance of global nature. And that ideology is rooted in Islamic fundamentalism, both Shia and Sunnah. The only difference is that for Shia, it's the 12 Imam who went in hiding in the 8th century at 5-year-old, who will emerge at the end of days to march the armies toward Jerusalem. But for Zaydis like the Houthis, it would be born out of Prophet Muhammad's bloodline. Mm-hmm. And some of the Houthi supporters and the ideologues around Abdul-Malik al-Houthi, some say that Abdul-Malik al-Houthi himself, Abdul-Malik al-Houthi is the leader of the movement, believe that he is that figure. The figure is known in Islamic in Islam, the figure is known as Al-Mahdi. Is this sort of messianic savior who will emerge in the end of days and restore justice into the world. But it starts with taking Jerusalem.
So it's kind of a Messiah in their view.
Correct.
Yeah. You mentioned about the Yemen being ruling by the Imamites up until 1962, if I stand correct, and correct me if I'm wrong. So part of what they want is actually restoring the previous influence that the community used to have, if I'm getting it correct. And it's kind of quite fascinating by concept, because when it comes to the communities, the general understanding is that it's an affiliation of the Shiism, it's Zaydis. But also there are arguments out there, and I have a feeling that you know better. I'm sure you know better. I would like to take your take on it. Is that the Houthis are, aside being a Shia and an ideological community, they are also tribal in structure. There are tribal society. There's a great deal of bonds between different Zaydis tribe, which Houthis comes from of it, or they kind of get the leg into the rise of the Houthis movement. I would like to know what is your insight on it. Is it a tribal infrastructure? Is it a tribal community, or it's solely an ideological bond based on the Zayd?
No. Yeah. So the Houthis are not a tribe. The Houthis are a clan. The Houthis are Sayyids, Hashemites, meaning they are they come at the top of the social strata as descendants of the Prophet. That's how they identify themselves. So they're not tribes. They are Hashemite Sayyids. Okay, so that's the class they belong to. Tribes are different, and you're right. I mean, Zaydi tribes in the north, they identify as Zaydi tribes, but it's not an ideological identification. Zaydi tribes, like tribes all over Yemen, are pretty pragmatic. They're anti-ideology, but they identify as Zaydi tribes. It's more of a geographic identity, since they belong to the north, where the Zaydi Imamate ruled for hundreds of years, and they became Zaydis. It became they became known as the Zaydi tribes, but it's not an ideological identity. And the Zaydis, and for the most part, I mean, throughout Yemen's history, Zaydis and Shafi'is are the moderate version of Sunni, Zaydis are the moderate version of Shia, have coexisted in Yemen. There's never been any sectarian conflict of that sort. Most of the conflicts are rooted in grievances and sort of political differences and competition over power and resources rather than sectarianism. So in terms of the Houthis' relationship with the tribes, the Houthis have been trying to have built an extremely repressive system, and part of that system includes dismantling the tribal structure, because the tribal structure have always prevented the central government or the regimes from oppressing people. And the tribes in Yemen are armed, they're independent, they're strong. And so part of why the Houthis want to dismantle the tribal system, and they've been trying to do that for the past 10 years through different methods, and I can talk about that, is to ensure that the tribes are not a threat to them, while at the same time exploiting the tribes for their own purposes. For example, to recruit fighters, to indoctrinate the younger population in the tribes, and so on and so forth. But there is no bond between the tribes and the Houthis. Right now, the relationship is sometimes transactional. Sometimes it's, for the tribes, it's this. They don't have an option. They cannot really go against the Houthis, but to a large extent, the Houthis are deeply, deeply resented by the tribes because of their repressive nature, and because they have really upsetted the tribal structure, but also they violated a lot of the tribal codes and values and ethics.
Wow. Well, thank you. I want to make another pivot back to your initial remarks. You mentioned about Houthis being influenced by the Islamic Republic of Iran, by the revolution in 1979, which Iranian sources suggest that right after the revolution, a group of delegation of the Houthis went to the Iran, or the Zaydis, and they met with Ayatollah Khomeini. After the Iranian Revolution, it seems that Iran has been trying to assimilate or incorporate the Zaydis version of the Shiism, or the way that they practicing the Shia, or their method of their theology, into the 12 or Isna Ashari Shia, or 12 Imami Shia. We kind of witness a gradual difference, or in the way that the Houthis mourn for the Imam Hussein or Muharram. We kind of witnessed it's kind of evolving. It's not as similar quite as they used to do, or that they don't go through the measures or way of the performance that they used to do it 50 years ago. What they do today for the mourning of the Muharram, or some other also religious traditions, is quite similar to what the Iranians do, the 12 Imamis do. I would like to ask you about the depth of the Iran's today in influence of Iran's today in Yemen and over the Houthis, the role that the Iranian played, if they played any, in Houthis takeover, and then the role that Iranian played in sponsoring and supporting to sustain Houthis' role in northern Yemen.
So in terms of ideology, the Houthis and Iran's ideology align, but not 100%. In fact, traditional Shia scholars in Iran consider Zaydis atheists. Mm-hmm. And the Houthis, they ridicule the Shia sort of 12er theory. I would say the relationship is more ideological / pragmatic. Iran, certainly, Qasem Soleimani saw an opportunity in the Houthis to infiltrate the Arabian Peninsula and sort of threaten Saudi Arabia, while at the same time, open a gate to the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. The Houthis owe their rise to the Iranians, to the IRGC in particular. So Iran has been investing in the Houthis since the 1980s. The father of the Houthi movement leader and the founder, Hussein al-Houthi, both spent time in Qom, in Iran in the 80s. Abdel Malik al-Houthi himself also spent time in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, and also in Iran in the 1990s. And that relationship, the Hezbollah commanders and IRGC commanders have been present in Yemen long before the war. So, for example, Abu Raza Shahlai, who was sanctioned by the US in 2008, was in Yemen, had been in Yemen before the Houthis took over the capital. So Iran was involved in the Houthis' plot to expand throughout Yemen, including to take the capital. I think when people say Iran was upset that the Houthis took over Sana'a, I think that's just Iran feeding people, misinformation. I think Iran might have been surprised that Sana'a fell into the hands of the Houthis easily, but they were not upset about it. So since 2014, Iran sent hundreds, and this is Iranian officials saying, hundreds of experts to Yemen to help the Houthis. Iran has helped the Houthis expand militarily throughout Yemen, so military strategizing, military operations, they've trained them. It has helped the Houthis, with weapons, including ballistic missiles, drones, but also helped the Houthis develop weapon manufacturing technology. Iran has been involved in the Houthis' cross-border attacks. In fact, Iran IRGC commanders on the ground have managed cross-border attacks, including attacks against Saudi Arabia, but also Red Sea attacks. The Houthis also run the country. The Houthis have established this highly repressive police state that runs the country through a jihadist council that is led by Abdel Malik al-Houthi, who was the leader of the Houthi movement. His first aide is an IRGC commander, and the deputy aide is a Hezbollah commander. That's how Iran is involved with the Houthis. I will borrow, so the Iran model is Iran is managing the Houthis, but Iran does not micromanage the Houthis. They're not involved in the routine sort of day-to-day sort of small activities. I will borrow a term that a friend of mine said last week. Iran's hands are not on the steering wheel. Iran is the steering wheel. It's not accurate to say that the Houthis are independent of Iran. They're not, but they can be in time.
So if I stand correct, when you're saying this, you're suggesting that while the relationship between Iran and Houthis is not necessarily a patron-client relationship, but it's a somewhat of a partnership with a high degree of reliance from Houthis being the junior partner on the Iranian as the main sponsor and the senior partner. That's the way that you are describing the dynamic? I
think it's still a patron-client, but it's moving towards becoming a partnership. And I think in time it might become a full partnership. But right now, IRGC commanders are on the ground supporting the Houthis in every step, including the Houthis' expansion into the Horn of Africa.
So, and what are the factors that they are forcing this evolution from the patron-client to the partnership?
I think Iran has been under tremendous pressure, especially recently since President Trump came to office. And I think for Iran, it would help them if they gradually sort of enabled the Houthis to take charge. Like right now in the Horn of Africa, Iran has helped the Houthis forge relationships with AQAP in Yemen, with Somali Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and ISIS in Somalia, also Somali pirates. But the Houthis, information indicate that the Houthis are now sort of are in charge of managing this relationship. We're seeing an evolution towards sort of the Iranians almost not quiet, but almost phasing out, and the Houthis kind of taking over that part of the operation. But I think that's just not completely allowing the Houthis to be in charge, but for Iran to become or to have more like plausible deniability.
And I'm very glad that you mentioned that relationships or connection that the Houthis are building with the Somalian Al-Shabaab and other regional actors, because that was actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask you. There have been many reports about the relationship between Houthis and Al-Shabaab and also the pirates and other actors. Even the Institute of Rusi has made I believe, an extensive and reliable study, not a paper, talking about the Houthis trying to build their own network of axis of resistance. I would like to ask you that about the dynamic or the nature of the Houthis have, specifically speaking with the actors in Somalia, pirates and the Al-Shabaab. What's the ultimate goal here from them? What is driving a radical Sunni group and a radical Shia group to cooperate? Is it purely based on the mutual perception that they have of the United States, or it's something bigger here?
That's part of it. I think radical Shia and radical Sunni ideology align when it comes to Israel, when it comes to, this messianic vision, the destruction of Israel, capturing Jerusalem and establishing a global sort of Islamic state or Islamic government. But for now, the goals are the same, which is pushing the U.S. out of the region. And also a lot of it has to do with establishing and strengthening smuggling routes, illicit trade. Money has a lot to do with it. So revenue streams, for example, one of the benefits that the Houthis are reaping in Somalia is access to mining. And the Houthis have been training Al-Shabaab in building sophisticated weapons and bombs. The Houthis have provided Al-Qaeda with drones that are used to attack Yemeni government forces in the south. And hundreds of Al-Shabaab militants were sent to Yemen and were trained by the Houthis. Some of them went back home, and some of them were sent to Iran for additional training. So yes, the Houthis are forging their own axis of resistance across the Horn of Africa, but Iran is part and parcel of that.
I'm very glad that you mentioned about what the Houthis provide and what their incentives are. The Israeli think tanks last week, I think it was Alma think tank, published a very, very interesting study and very interesting to some extent about news, arguing that Iranians are developing new facilities in Sudan and trying to basically establish a new route to the Lebanon via the Red Sea to arm and supplies the Hezbollahs. I wonder that if you think, and I understand that's a very hard question to ask, we don't know yet, the grounds are not solid on that front, but I wonder that if you think the Houthis would play any role in developing such an alternative route to supply and arm Hezbollah?
I think yes. So the Houthis are Iran's last standing proxy. And there's the Iraqi militias, but their situation is a little different. The Houthis have much more access and much more potential. And the Horn of Africa and in Africa in general is a fertile land for Iran to establish bases, to establish routes, to establish supply lines. So, and the Houthis have been all over Africa. The Houthis have been in Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Sudan. Some reports also that indicate that they've been also in Libya. And so I wouldn't be surprised if these reports are accurate. In fact, they're most likely accurate as Iran is trying to compensate for the massive loss it endured, Hezbollah weakening and also the loss of the Assad regime.
Well, I think we discussed quite fairly, given to our timings, about the regional actors, relations with the Somalian pirates and Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda. But I think it would be unfair if we don't discuss the international actors. A while ago, I believe it was in October 2024, Wall Street Journal made a report in which they made an argument that Russia has been providing the Houthis with the targeting data, the navigation, the route of the ships. And prior to that, also been various reports from different institutes, not only one, making a claim, which seems to be accurate in my view, correct me, you are the expert of the matter, that the Houthis also been quite growingly avoiding targeting the Chinese or Chinese-owned or ships. I would like to ask you first, what do you think or what do you know of the Houthis' relationship with these two international actors that you can share with us? And second, what are the motives that they have to have a relationship with the Houthis, if they have any, specifically regarding Russia? Because for China, we can understand it's a commercial state. Trade is a primary issue for them. So they want to have a maritime resiliency in the Red Sea. Russians' motives, on the other hand, is a bit vague. So you can explain this for us, for our audience. I would really much appreciate it.
Yeah, this relationship is beneficial for both the Houthis and also Russia and China. And the Houthis are also sending fighters to Russia to fight in Ukraine. It makes sense because for the Houthis, they get the expertise, they get the weapons, they get the technology. For Russia, expanding influence into Yemen is hugely beneficial because it means undermining U.S. influence in the Red Sea and in the Middle East. So that's what, and that also includes access to the Horn of Africa and all the benefits that come with it. Again, the Houthis are not just focused on Yemen and Somalia. They are, along with Iran. Iran is part of this too. They're all focusing on expanding influence into Africa, into the Horn of Africa and Africa. We've seen Iran increase influence in countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Sudan. And so Russia will benefit from all this, the access that comes with these relationships, whether in terms of, strengthening economic ties, political ties. security, but also more importantly, competing with the U.S. in that region, as U.S. influence we've seen is fading. And I mean, in terms of China, but China also buys 90% of Iran's oil, and half of that goes to the IRGC, and that funds their operations in Yemen. So it's indirect funding to the Houthis, but at the same time, the U.S. has sanctioned recently. They've sanctioned several Houthi leaders and Houthi affiliates for smuggling weapons from China into the Houthis, and also smuggling weapons and military-grade materials to the Houthis from Russia. So I think it only makes sense for these two international actors to build alliance with the Houthis to compete with the U.S.
Yeah, that's very interesting, specifically regarding Russians, because I think it's fair to say that historically speaking, Russians were interested in that region. Even during the Soviet Union, they made some on and off attempts. But speaking of the international powers, you brought United States. And it seems United States is in the new period of time with the Houthis, new generation of the clash with the Houthis, specifically speaking after the October 7, that the Houthis for some reason got involved, which I want to first ask you a question about why they got involved, why they decided to interrupt. Was it the pressure of the Iranian or an independent decision? And second, how so far United States handled the Houthis' naval revolt or let's say that disruptive actions in the Red Sea? Were they effective or how do you evaluate the U.S. actions now?
The U.S. is attacking Houthi targets because the Houthis have been attacking ships in the Red Sea. I think the Trump administration has made that objective very clear. They want to degrade the Houthis' capabilities in order to prevent them from attacking ships. Part of that is an indirect message to Iran or a message to Iran, but it is to prevent the Houthis from attacking ships in itself. The attacks have been, I was told, or I'm told, have been very, very precise. They have degraded some of the Houthis' capabilities. We don't know. It's too early to know how much, but it also disrupted the Houthis' communication systems because it targeted communication systems. And it also killed many of their leaders or commanders at the operational level, especially those that are dealing with the drones and missiles. So it did, for the first time, I am hearing, for the first time, the Houthis believe that they face real war. Whatever happened before the March 15 attacks did not really put the Houthis under pressure. Now they feel that they're under real military pressure. Now, would that really destroy the Houthis' ability to attack ships in the future? I think airstrikes by themselves are not going to. Because of one reason, the Houthis have proven before that they can withstand airstrikes. In fact, they have suffered 6 years of airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition and emerged even stronger. And the U.S. cannot bomb the Houthis forever. I mean, it's expensive. It's not sustainable. What the Houthis are relying on is the passage of time. They can wait. And then when the U.S. stops, they can restock their weapons, storage through the massive smuggling routes that they have established with the help of Iran. I'm told that for every ship that gets interdicted, 100 ships pass.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm told by professionals in smuggling and arms smuggling. I mean, I've heard from them. So the Houthis will restock and just wait. And they will learn from this, they will adapt, and they will come back stronger. So the only way to neutralize the Houthi threat once and for all is to work with the Yemeni government, provide them with the necessary support that they need to defeat the Houthis through ground operation. And I'm not suggesting that we, as the U.S., that we send boots on the ground. Yemenis don't need boots on the ground. The Yemeni government needs support. We have, in Yemen, there are, the government has about 200,000 fighters across the various front lines, and they're eager to defeat the Houthis. They just have never really got the support they needed to do that. So if the U.S. administration wants to, and if the U.S. government wants to achieve its objective in dismantling the Houthis' capabilities to resume attacks against ships in the future, they need to team up with the Yemeni government, and they need to support Yemeni government forces to take the Houthis down.
Thank you, Nadwa. I'm very glad that you brought future. We discussed the past, the roots of the Houthis. We discussed present, and now I want to conclude this podcast with one final question and ask you about the future. What future holds for Yemen and Houthis if the current status quo continues to be sustained and survive? How do you see the future of Yemen?
Broadly speaking, I can think about two scenarios. Mm-hmm. Scenario number one, the U.S. and the Saudi-led coalition partner with the Yemeni government, support the Yemeni government for the Yemeni forces to defeat the Houthis, and then transition into post-war. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but it will give Yemen a chance at peace and a to move forward into a brighter future. Mm-hmm. The second scenario is the U.S. relying on airstrikes and then, for a few months and then stops. And then for the Houthis to wait for a year or two or three and then come back stronger, take over all Yemen, expand into the Horn of Africa and then present a nightmare to the U.S. and the West. Wow. And also regional allies.
Nadwa Al-Dawsari, once again, thank you for your insights. It's been a pleasure to have you on Unpack podcast. I want to thank you on behalf of also our team at the Global National Security Institute. It truly was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this timely conversation about Yemen, the attacks on Houthi targets, and the global effects of that chain of events. I anticipate a lot more news to come on that conflict, and now you've got a good baseline to follow future events. Thanks to our special guest today, Nadwa Al-Dawsari, an Associate Fellow with the Middle East Institute. Thanks as well to Dr. Armand Mahmoudian, GNSI Research Fellow and Resident Expert on the Middle East. Our regular episode of At the Boundary drops on Monday, and we look forward to welcoming David Kramer, the Executive Director of the George W. Bush Institute. But for today, thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, please share with your colleagues and network. You can follow GNSI on our LinkedIn and X accounts at USF_GNSI. And check out our website as well at usf.edu/GNSI, where you can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter. That's going to wrap up this special episode of At the Boundary. Whether a regular weekly or breaking special, every episode will feature global and national security issues we found to be insightful, intriguing, fascinating, maybe controversial, but overall, just worth talking about. I'm Jim Cardoso, and we'll see you at the Boundary.